Dr. Graham Hill is a criminologist and former senior investigating officer with the Surrey Police. During his career, Graham worked to solve some of the UK's most high-profile and infamous crimes, including the murder of Millie Dowler and the London Night Stalker Delroy Grant.
Someone has to be in charge. Someone has to bring the investigation towards its ultimate conclusion.
Graham, who specialises in child abduction and murder, assisted the Portuguese police in the investigation into the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. In this series, he's using his own insider knowledge and expertise to unpack the investigation from the inside out.
The public only ever sees the tip of the iceberg. I want to tell the full story and reveal how detectives brought a series of elusive killers to justice.
This is Murder Detective.
Capel St Mary is a very small rural village. It's got a population of just over 2,000 people. It's one of the lowest crime areas in the country.
Just a little sleepy Suffolk village, really, but I think it had a good community spirit and had the village hall quite near where Auntie Joan lived. Nothing major used to happen there, I don't think.
I always got the impression that probably everyone knew everyone and it was just a nice, relaxed area to live in.
But on a sleepy Sunday morning in December 2001, the discovery of a body in Capel St Mary sent shockwaves through the peaceful village.
9:45 in the morning, police are called to the address after the discovery of the lifeless body of Joan Albert. She's a 79-year-old widow who actually lived at the address.
Some neighbours noticed that Joan's curtains were still drawn, and that was unusual. They let themselves in and found her at the bottom of the stairs. Probably assumed that she'd had some sort of heart attack or illness. The ambulance attended, and obviously within their examinations, the ambulance crew discovered that she had some stab wounds.
Some of those stab wounds were delivered with such force they penetrated very, very deeply into her body, which gives an indication of the ferocity of the attack.
I was in the car with my daughter, the 3 grandchildren, and son-in-law. I was driving. We were going for a Christmas meal, an early Christmas meal. And we were all quite happy, singing Jingle Bells with the children and things like that. And then as we neared the road where she lived, we could see there was a policeman standing there and some tape across the road. Can I ask you what you're doing in Capel today and what is your business here? And I said, we've come to visit Auntie Joan for a Christmas meal. He said, I'm afraid I have some bad news for you. She's dead. We as a family were just devastated. We couldn't believe that anybody could do that to our dear little auntie who wouldn't hurt a fly. That was very harrowing after that.
Criminologist and former senior investigating officer Dr. Graham Hill is driving to Boydlands, where Joan Albert lived, to meet Roy Lambert, the SIO who was assigned to this case.
So Roy, here we are in Boydlands, Capel St Mary, near Ipswich, and behind me to the right is the house where Joan Albert was killed in 2001. Can you tell me what your first impressions were when you arrived at the scene?
My first impressions were, this is really unusual. It's a really good class area, lots of different houses. And why has this old lady apparently been targeted and murdered in such a terrible way? But obviously this is the first day. I've got so much information I've got to gather and take in, which will help me hypothesise on what's in fact happened to Joan.
And at that time, were you assessing where the cordons were, whether they were too tight, whether they were needed to go out a bit, and trying to get a feel for where there might be the best forensic opportunities?
Yeah, there was two stages where we're going to have the cordon for a fingertip search of the premises, gardens and nearby, and then the house to house. And it's really important as an SIO, so you can get it right in policy-wise, to set boundaries for where the house to house is going to be.
So one of the key decisions for Roy to make in this particular investigation was in what order to look at the forensic opportunities in Joan's home. So he would have taken advice from the crime scene manager, from the forensic science service, and written a strategy which would allow him to retrieve the evidence in a particular order that allowed him not to contaminate or destroy the evidence as it was collected.
In this case, what was discovered very early on by the first attending officers is the fact there's a broken window in the kitchen at the rear of the house. Vitally important. You now have to also consider, how did they get in the garden?
We found several shoe marks, as well as some fibres on the fence of Vine Walk, and some shoe marks there, partial one on a compost bin, and then some shoe marks facing the way out in Boydlands. These weren't good footprints, but we did manage to obtain some patterns of the bottom of the soles.
It would have to be a very, very good cast of that to actually come up with enough detail to say that shoe made that footprint.
We fingerprinted nearly every surface in the house in an effort to try and find the offender or offender's fingerprints. We found some fingerprints which I think still to this day are unidentified, but I think it was only about 4 sets of prints.
The murder weapon in this case, a knife, was found near to Joan's body. The blood on it is Joan's. There is no other DNA profile on that weapon.
At this point, detectives were unable to find any DNA evidence at the scene, and the search for a motive wasn't proving any easier.
That weekend of this stage, I've got an open mind. I'm just processing various things. Could be a burglary that's gone wrong, but nothing's apparently stolen, so why has somebody gone that? There was no other evidence of a reason why this savage attack, and this is Suffolk. We're at one stage, we used to be the lowest crime rate in the country. For an elderly lady to be attacked in such a way was very unusual. So we need to get into what we call victimology of Joan herself.
One of the most important things an SIO has to do at the scene of a murder is ask themselves what is known about the victim. In this case, Joan was in her own home, so she was quickly identified, but they would still want to build a picture of Joan's life because it's very important to establish people that might want to cause her any harm or people that she'd fallen out with. And so they appoint family liaison officers, and family liaison officers are the go-betweens between the police service and the family, but they're also part of the investigation team. And their job is to not only inform the family about what the police are doing, but also to get information about the victim, about the family in general, and bring that back to the investigation room and to the SIO.
We go back to the family and say, is there anything you've forgotten? Can you tell me something else? Or you mentioned something, can we just go over that again? They probably feel like they've been grilled and interviewed by us, but it is really, really important because it does often hold the key to discovering who the suspect or the killer is.
We came from a little village called Debenham. Auntie Joan and her 2 sisters started a hairdressing shop, and apparently the villagers, the older villagers, even now remember when they came to Debenham. They were something that nobody'd seen before. They were glamorous, they wore makeup, they wore heels, and they'd done hair. Very glamorous lifestyle. She was a very kind person, very chatty. I can still hear her laughter. That was my earliest memories. Because she had no children herself, she used to come and spend a lot of time with me and my sister and buy us gifts, and we were quite privileged in our village.
We soon learned that Joan had been a widow for about 10 years. Her husband had died previously. She relied on friends to take her out and about, friends or relatives.
She was very frail. I'd taken her for an appointment for her heart about 2 weeks before, and she struggled to get to the clinic, holding on to me. She lived for Rusty. He wasn't particularly well dog, he had a little bit of a heart problem, and he was on diuretics, so he was always going out, so she was up in the middle of the night quite a lot with him.
She would get up with the torch and let the dog out. And Joan didn't look like she'd panicked or anything like that. The bedclothes were drawn back. She'd got her slippers on. She'd got her dressing gown was all tied up. She'd come down the stairs with her torch. But it's then it would appear there was a confrontation by whoever was responsible at the bottom of the stairs.
So the police were thinking, was this an attempted burglary that just went wrong? Or was it something more sinister? Was there something deeper in this? Was she killed with no robbery as a motive?
No DNA, no motive, no forensics. Detectives were struggling to find a lead in the hunt for Joan's attacker. The team needed to widen the search and look to the post-mortem in the hope that the case didn't become cold. Criminologist and former SIO Dr. Graham Hill is looking into the disturbing murder of Joan Albert, a 79-year-old widow who was brutally stabbed to death in her own home in the lead-up to Christmas. SIO Roy Lambert and his team had found no DNA evidence at the scene and nothing that pointed towards a suspect.
At the scene, the police were faced with an awful lot of uncertainty. They were at a loss to piece together who could have possibly wanted to enter this woman's house and to kill her.
Talking about forensic, we're talking about what you're thinking at the time. When was the post-mortem conducted and did you attend?
Yes, I went to the post-mortem, and it would have been either later on the Monday or the Tuesday, where we used a specially trained Home Office pathologist along with a crime scene manager and scenes of crime officers who take exhibits, they take pictures of Joan's injuries and everything like that. So it's done in a proper, structured way, again, utilising good practice to make sure we don't miss any evidence which is in fact on Joan and on the body. The 2 wounds in the back were the first ones, the pathologist said, followed by 3 quite savage ones to the front, and then she died it would have been pretty quick. We later found out, which wasn't released generally at the time, that there had been another couple of wounds to the body, one on her knee and one slightly across her face. They probably occurred after she died. They can tell that because your heart stops beating and there's no blood flow, so there was no signs of any bleeding of those things. So that in itself was a very strange factor in what had happened to Joan.
One of the things that's important is what we term the post-mortem interval. In other words, what's the window that we can work out when our victim died? We know from inquiries that were made that she was spoken to on the telephone at 10:30 the previous evening. So we know she was alive then. And we obviously know when the police were called, 9:45 the next morning. So we have that window. And what that does is that narrows a suspect's potential alibi, which can be crucial.
With a time frame established, police returned to the scene a week later to conduct what's known as an anniversary check.
So an anniversary check is where the investigation team will deploy people back to the scene, usually 7 days after the incident, to see if they can get people walking past or driving past that were in the area that they may not have been able to get in contact with for one reason or another. So they're quite important because they give the public information that there's been a crime, and then they also allow the public to give information to the police that stop them either in the car or walking along the street.
This is just before Christmas. It's like the party season in Suffolk. We found out there was a line dancing event at the village hall, not far from Jones. There was over 200 people there. So that's an inquiry for us. We found there was a big party going on. There was over 40 odd people at this party. So you need to know all these things because these are people we need to see, because as they've been going home, walking home or driving, they may have seen something which later might prove to be significant.
The anniversary visit for the murder of Joan Albert suddenly created a vast list of people who were in the area at the time of her murder. Roy Lambert and his team took a decision to bring in a criminal profiler who could help detectives understand more about the potential killer and their behaviour patterns.
Let's go on and talk about the use of a behavioural investigative advisor and how you used that person on this investigation.
They give you a picture of the type of person, perhaps, who may be responsible for this sort of offence.
So in this case, they helped you build a matrix so that you could overlay the information you had and build a list of potential suspects that might be in the area.
That's right. We came up with about 500 people who were in fact moving around during our relevant time. I wanted somebody who's done some research in other previous offences. They come and look at your crime and then they will go and research other similar crimes, and then they'll be able to tell you, if they've been detected, what sort of person or persons commit these types of crimes, what's in their background. And I thought, if I have that information, that will help me in the investigation.
They would basically help the inquiry to hone down and to get more specific on certain individuals and certain age groups and certain traits within the inquiry itself. So they would assist the SIO in being more targeted in his approach.
The crime scene investigators were also able to provide the case with its first forensic breakthrough.
After a huge sweep of the area, the forensic team managed to find a huge number of very distinctive fibres, but the places in which they were found were very telling.
The fibres were found both on the body, in various areas within inside the house, and also on the broken window and on the window ledge outside.
You would then tape around the smashed area of the glass to pick up any fibre evidence from there. And that fibre evidence can lead back to a suspect if they're found with those same fibres, and also can link the point of entry, which would have been that smashed window, to other areas within the crime scene, for example, the deceased, who may also have had fibres on the body.
The Forensic Science Service did a fantastic job because it was several weeks. I spoke to the scientist and they said they found these fibres which were really unusual. And in fact, at the time they said they hadn't seen this type of fibre for over 20 odd years in the FSS.
They are a fibre designated as nylon 66. Now at this time, in 2001, they were extremely rare. In looking at it, it has a shine to it.
And they said, if you find the offender or offenders with these same fibres, we'll be able to say if they match.
Now, as far as Roy Lambert's concerned, that is a crucial bit of information because he can now start to think about how he can use that information, use those fibres as a way of identifying the killer one way or the other.
With this fibre evidence, Roy Lambert made an innovative decision when searching for the suspect, something that had not been undertaken in the UK before.
So with my scientific support manager, we came up with a procedure where we could go out into the community, examine people's houses to see if they had any of the same fibres that were on Joan and in her house, in their premises.
A number of search warrants were applied for in a magistrate's court, and then various teams were got together and they had to go out to each and every one of those homes where tapings were taken, from places like bottoms of wardrobes, if they owned a vehicle at the time that Joan was murdered and they still had it, then seats, driver's seats, carpets, sofas, bedrooms, places where if you were wearing an item of clothing and you had perhaps stored it or worn it or sat in it, it may have left fibres behind.
Mass screening for fibres is very complex, very time consuming, so you'd have to go in, you are looking for a certain type of fibre, so from the forensic scientist you would get a description, in this case nylon 66, you would get the colour of that, and so you would look for potential items of clothing within that property, within a suspect property to recover, and then obviously do a one-to-one comparison with the suspect fibres and the crime scene fibres.
The senior investigating officer decision to take fibre samples and create that fibre matrix actually pays off. They discover fibres in a house in Capel St Mary that match those unique nylon 66 fibres found on our victim and at the crime scene.
We examined 40-odd houses in our first priority matrix sweep, and we didn't find any fibres. That's in 40. In the offender's wardrobe, we found over 1,000.
This was the breakthrough that Roy Lambert and his team had been looking for. The suspect was identified as 25-year-old bartender Simon Hall. He was the son of Joan Albert's neighbour.
Simon Hall was interesting. He was in the matrix because he lived locally and he had a previous conviction for violent crime. Subsequent inquiries revealed that Simon Hall's mum, Lynn Hall, was the lady that walked Joan's dog, Rusty, and therefore there was a link between the Hall family and Joan.
Lynn is known to our victim. She actually lives literally one street away from her.
Whilst the forensic evidence clearly pointed towards Hall being the prime suspect in Joan Albert's motiveless murder, arresting and charging him was not a straightforward next step.
Simon had an alibi for this murder. He was in Ipswich with friends of his at a birthday party. And what Simon is saying on the house-to-house inquiry form is that he was in Ipswich till the very early hours of the morning, till 6 or 7 a.m. when he dropped off a friend in Ipswich and then drove back home.
Despite Simon Hall being the prime suspect for detectives, police were unable to arrest him while his seemingly watertight alibi was in place. It would come down to the minute detail on the night of Joan's murder that would progress this case to the next step. SIO Roy Lambert and his investigation team had linked 25-year-old Simon Hall to the murder of Joan Albert. But a seemingly watertight alibi meant that they could not arrest him right away.
You have Simon with what appears to be an alibi. What you now have to do is prove and disprove. Whoever he named as being at that party, they will have been visited, they will have been seen, and the facts checked out.
He said that night he'd finished working at the Rep, which is a bar in Ipswich. He'd been drinking, they went to a club somewhere, more drinking. He didn't say, but we found out from people who knew him and met him that he'd taken some cocaine that night.
The one certainty of his description of where he had been on the night of the murder was when he took his friend home after the night's celebrations and woke his friend's mother up, and she said that was at 5:30. The next time they had anything to fit in with Hall's movements was he said that he was home at 6:30, but that still gave an hour unexplained of where he had been on his own in the village of Capel St Mary.
His mum rung up at least once, maybe even more than once, to the interview room and said, have you got the results of the fibres from our house yet to see whether there's any fibres there? And I thought, well, hang on a minute, why is she ringing up? She's saying the sun has nothing to do with it, but she's ringing up to see if there's any fibres there. And also, she did try and change her timing, so he would have had less time to commit the offence. I think she started to try and say, oh, he got home about 6:15, not 6:30. But when she was seen by the house-to-house, and this is why it's really important that officers never forget attention to detail, and you really need to encourage them to be always on their game, because it's so important. But she said, and I want to say, she said it was 6:28. And that's a bit unusual. So how do you know it's exactly 6:28? And she said it was on the microwave.
With suspicions raised, police quickly started to find other discrepancies in Simon's story.
The number of times that he said that he'd met Joan seemed to vary on his whim. The number of times he said that she had been in his car, and then said that she hadn't been in his car. Equally, he changed what he was wearing on the night. He started off by saying that he was wearing a fleece. Later, he changed that to a black leather jacket, none of which he could provide the police with.
The devil is in the detail. He's got a reason to lie. Why is he lying?
With his lack of consistency of his alibi and his changes in the story in relation to various items and various circumstances, police, then the SIO, made the decision to actually go and arrest him.
After identifying a link between Simon Hall and Joan Albert, SIO Roy Lambert took the decision to arrest Hall and officially charge him with Joan's murder. Hall denied any involvement. The trial began in Norwich in February 2003, 50 miles away from where Joan's family members lived.
My understanding is that for a judge to hear a Crown Court case, they have to be of a certain calibre. And at that time in Suffolk, I don't think there was a judge that could hear a murder trial. So it was sent to Norwich Crown Court, which in itself is fine. But for the family, that's a great deal of travelling. At that time, family liaison officers were very much involved with asking the family whether they wanted to go to the court. They don't have to. And if they did, then trying to prepare them beforehand. The everyday person doesn't get to sit in a Crown Court trial, particularly not a murder trial. And then suddenly it's all open and everything's going to be said about, your loved one, and hearing all the details. It's a lot for the family to go through.
You know it's going to be horrible. But you forget there's going to be evidence. There was a knife that was used. It was her dressing gown she had on. And that's just, can't describe it. I still can't watch anything like that on telly to this day, because to us that's a reality, not story.
The trial lasted 12 days. During which time Simon Hall was still pleading his innocence.
He did go into the witness box and he did tell his story, but of course it meant that the prosecution barrister could cross-examine him. I would say completely destroyed Simon Hall in the witness box, and it was actually embarrassing to watch because he couldn't keep up with the questioning.
He looked at the floor a lot. He didn't really look at anybody in the eye, I don't think. Just couldn't stop staring at him, really. Just wanted to sort of say, why did you do that?
Traditionally, fibre evidence is old school forensic evidence, but it's no less important than DNA or fingerprints, for example. So with the strength of the evidence from the crime scene and the suspect's clothing and the number and the type of uniqueness of that fibre evidence, it was incredibly compelling and very distinguishable evidence for the prosecution.
However, with no DNA evidence linking him to Joan's murder, Simon's legal team were able to put up a strong defence.
They're pointing out things such as there are no footprints. There is certainly no DNA that belongs to Simon. There are no fingerprints belonging to him. inside the premises, just those fibres.
Hall's mother, Lynn, also came forward to, shall we say, cloud the issues on behalf of her son by saying that she had transferred certain items of his clothing between wardrobes, to say that it was exclusively from his clothing that the fibres had come in her house would, in her words, be completely wrong. All these matters were designed to try and hold the prosecution case in the eyes of the jury.
At the trial, he maintained his stance of he was innocent, he wouldn't do something like that. And his defence, they attacked the evidence, not so much the fibres, but they attacked the process, how we were doing it. They were saying our process was flawed, and the fact that our evidence given by the scientists was not strong, and in fact their client did not kill Joe.
So it becomes down to that old defence trick is you can't attack the evidence, you attack the process of how the evidence was gained.
That's right.
I always talk about how important policy is for SIOs. So tell us a little bit about how important your policy was around limiting cross-contamination when you came to give evidence.
The first thing was, before I wrote the policy, I got in all the experts. Our crime scene managers spoke to the FSS and said, what are the issues that we need to consider? Having done that, then I wrote the policy, and then we documented actually the procedure that officers would take at each of these examinations, each of the houses that they would go into. So there was a proper structured approach, we had a proper briefing, so everybody was given the opportunity to ask questions about how it was going to be.
So using your policy, you were able to defend what actions you took during this investigation?
That's correct.
On the 28th of February 2003, after 6 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict.
My sister and me, we held hands so tight, we just couldn't let go. And it's so nerve-wracking. And you can hardly hear what's being said because you're just so nervous and you think you're going to faint. And then when they said guilty, oh gosh, what a relief.
It was 11-1 majority, I believe, so one person wasn't quite sure, but it was enough to convict him. It was great relief. And for the police, after all the work that they'd done, that is the best result in the world that you can get. You have got your verdict, and that is the most important thing for, you know, the wider members of society, the family, everybody, but most importantly for Joan, of course.
Simon was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 16 years. But this was only the beginning of what would become a further 10-year fight for justice. Local Suffolk bartender Simon Hall had been convicted of the brutal murder of 79-year-old widow Joan Albert in 2003 and sentenced to life in prison. But this was only the start of countless appeals by Simon and his legal team.
Simon Hall was convicted, sentenced to life imprisonment and also a 16-year recommendation. But that wasn't the end of it for you, was it? What happened after that?
No, what happened was he then made appeals using his defence team. They then looked to find different scientists and they demanded to re-examine the exhibits again in the case, which we give them access to. But it went on for several years, them trying to find a way to weaken, if not destroy, the forensic evidence that the FSS was saying was responsible for identifying Hall as the killer of Joan. There was an element of doubt, I don't know why, in the media that he might not have done it. So we then went through for several years, a long time, where he appealed. He had a first appeal, which was thrown out. He then managed to get the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is called something else now, to review the case. They felt the science might not be right, and they managed to refer it back to the Court of Appeal.
His legal team had appointed a forensic expert in fibres. So then it was down to the Forensic Science Service and his newly appointed fibre expert sort of arguing in court about what they'd found when they'd examined the fibres. The Forensic Science Service, as they always do, they've moved on with their examination techniques. They get better and better. We know DNA gets better and better. So I think they were able to be more specific about those fibres. They found some green fibres within the black flock fibres as well, which also were found in the samples taken from Simon Hall's house and car. And he lost his appeal.
Simon's case attracted huge media attention. The Justice for Simon campaign was set up to try to overthrow his conviction.
His then girlfriend set up a website called Justice for Simon, and also managed to get the Innocence Project, which was run by the Bristol University and Rough Justice interested. There was a big TV documentary where he's shown being interviewed by two young ladies from the Bristol University, where he maintained his denial. A scientist did a mock-up of the point of entry, which was completely wrong, where they said he should have had glass all over him if he'd have broken the window in this way. Well, he didn't break it in the way they suggested. So there was a big wave of media. 2 MPs were supporting him.
He had a lot of followers. That was a huge campaign, huge. But for our family, that was dreadful. And the police tried to warn us when anything was going to come up, because it was appeal after appeal. It wasn't just one or two, there were several. You'd suddenly be watching telly, look east, and all of a sudden, there he was on the screen. And that was heart-wrenching. That was horrific.
There was huge pressure on Suffolk Police, and on Roy Lambert in particular, for years after he had successfully won the case and had the killer convicted. And this put him under stress himself personally, and also the family of the victim.
Simon Hall's appeals continued unsuccessfully until 2013, when he became eligible for parole.
They were getting ready to release him. And we'd had to meet with probation officer, and that was going to start up again because we were scared of him. We were terrified of him. We asked for him not to be allowed in Ipswich, which had been granted, but that wouldn't have meant anything. He could easily have come to Ipswich, I'm sure. So we were all on tenterhooks.
There was always updates to give the family. So normally when you're an FLO, you talk right in the beginning with the family about an exit strategy and how you're going to move away from the family, and you need to do that because they need to get on with their lives afterwards. But in this particular case, I was still working with the family right up until the time I retired from Suffolk Police in 2015, because there was always something to update them with to do with Simon Hall. I'd certainly say that I watched their health and their mental well-being deteriorate over those years because of this constant stress with what's next, what's happening. And so it went on, really.
But it was shortly before Simon Hall's potential release from prison that the case would take a darker turn.
He told an inmate or a prison officer that he in fact did kill Joan. And then he in fact admitted it to his girlfriend, who he'd married in prison, and admitted it to her. And then shortly after that, he committed suicide.
Police rang us up and brought a letter round, a signed confession. And the relief that brought was, oh my goodness, no more appeals, thank God.
I just think in the end, the whole thing just completely destroyed him as well. Perhaps, he had decided to take his own life, and his confession was part of that to put everything in order.
I think one of the important aspects of this case and this investigation was the length of time that the investigation carried on long after conviction. Roy, as the SIO, lived with this case or this investigation for well over a decade, and the family liaison officers stayed in contact with Joan Albert's family for over a decade. That is stressful, that is very difficult work, and all through the numerous appeals, the television programs that tried to suggest that he had been wrongly convicted, that put an awful amount of stress on Roy as the SIO and the family liaison officers. So when Simon Hall finally admitted to his crime, it was a significant weight off of everyone's shoulders. And as Roy has said many times, it vindicated his work, his policy, and it vindicated the work of the investigation team.
Simon Hall had finally admitted his guilt. But was this enough for Joan Albert's family?